Toad's Adventures. When Toad found himself imprisoned in a dank dungeon, and knew that all the grim darkness of a medieval fortress lay between him and the outer world of sunshine and well-made high roads where he had lately been so happy, disporting himself as if he had bought up every road in England, he flung himself at full length on the floor and shed bitter tears and abandoned himself to dark despair. "This is the end of everything," he said. "At least it is the end of the career of Toad, which is the same thing. The popular and handsome Toad, the rich and hospitable Toad, the Toad so free and careless and debonair. Oh, unhappy and forsaken Toad!" With lamentations such as these he passed his days and nights for several weeks, refusing his meals or intermediate light refreshments, though the grim and ancient jailer, knowing that Toad's pockets were well lined, frequently pointed out that many comforts and indeed luxuries could by arrangement be sent in at a price from the outside. Now the jailer had a daughter, a pleasant wench and good-hearted, who assisted her father in the lighter duties of his post. She was particularly fond of animals, and besides her canary, whose cage hung on a nail in the massive wall of the keep by day, to the great annoyance of the prisoners who relished an after-dinner nap, she kept several piebald mice and a squirrel. This kind-hearted girl, pitying the misery of Toad, said to her father one day, "Father, I can't bear to see that poor beast so unhappy and getting so thin. You let me have the managing of him. You know how fond of animals I am. I'll make him eat from my hand and sit up and do all sorts of things." Her father replied that she could do what she liked with him. He was tired of Toad and his skulks and his airs and his meanness. So that day she went on her errand of mercy and knocked on the door of Toad's cell. "Now cheer up, Toad," she said coaxingly on entering, "and sit up and dry your eyes and be a sensible animal. And do try to eat a bit of dinner. See, I've brought you some of mine, hot from the oven." It was a bubble and squeak between two plates, and its fragrance filled the narrow cell. The penetrating smell of cabbage reached the nose of Toad as he lay in his misery on the floor, and gave him the idea for a moment that perhaps his life was not such a blank and desperate thing as he had imagined. But still he wailed and kicked with his legs and refused to be comforted. So the wise girl retired for the time, but, of course, a good deal of the smell of hot cabbage remained behind, and as it will do, and Toad, between his sobs, sniffed and reflected, and gradually began to think new and inspiring thoughts. I'll show you a picture of her. When the girl returned some hours later, she carried a tray with a cup of fragrant tea steaming on it, and a plate piled up with very hot buttered toast, cut thick, very brown on both sides, with the butter running through the holes in it in golden drops, like honey from a honeycomb. The smell of that buttered toast simply talked to Toad, and with no uncertain voice, talked of warm kitchens, of breakfasts on bright frosty mornings, of cozy parlor firesides on winter evenings when one's ramble was over and slippered feet were propped on the fender, of the purring of contented cats and the twitter of sleepy canaries. Toad sat up on end once more, dried his eyes, sipped his tea and munched his toast, and soon began talking freely about himself and the house he lived in and his doings there, and how important he was and what a lot his friends thought of him. The jailer's daughter saw that this topic was doing him as much good as the tea, as indeed it was, and encouraged him to go on. When she said good night, having filled his water jug and shaken up his straw for him, Toad was very much the same sanguine, self-satisfied animal that he had been of old. He sang a little song or two of the sort he used to sing at his dinner parties, curled himself up in the straw, and had an excellent night's rest and the pleasantest of dreams. They had many interesting talks together after that as the dreary days went on, and the jailer's daughter grew very sorry for Toad and thought it a great shame that a poor little animal should be locked up in prison for what seemed to her a very trivial offense. One morning the girl was very thoughtful and answered at random, and did not seem to Toad to be paying proper attention to his witty sayings and sparkling comments. "Toad," she said presently, "just listen, please. I have an aunt who is a washerwoman." "There, there," said Toad graciously and affably. "Never mind, think no more about it. I have several aunts who ought to be washerwomen." "Do be quiet a minute, Toad," said the girl. "You talk too much. That's your chief fault. And I'm trying to think, and you hurt my head. As I said, I have an aunt who is a washerwoman. She does the washing for all the prisoners in this castle. We try to keep any paying business of that sort in the family, you understand. She takes out the washing on Monday morning and brings it in on Friday evening. This is Thursday. Now, this is what occurs to me. You are very rich. At least you're always telling me so, and she is very poor. A few pounds wouldn't make any difference to you, and it would mean a lot to her. Now, I think if she were properly approached, squared, I believe is the word you animals use, you could come to some arrangement by which she would let you have her dress and bonnet and so on, and you could escape from the castle as the official washerwoman. You're very alike in many respects, particularly about the figure." "We're not," said the Toad in a huff. "I have a very elegant figure for what I am." "So is my aunt," replied the girl, "for what she is. But have it your own way, you horrid, proud, ungrateful animal, when I'm sorry for you and trying to help you." "Yes, yes, that's all right. Thank you very much indeed," said the Toad hurriedly. "But look here. You wouldn't surely have Mr. Toad of Toad Hall going about the country disguised as a washerwoman?" Then you can stop here as a toad," replied the girl with much spirit. "I suppose you want to go off in a coach and four?" Honest Toad was as ready to admit himself in the wrong. "You're a good, kind, clever girl," he said, "and I am indeed a proud and stupid Toad. Introduce me to your worthy aunt, if you will be so kind, and I have no doubt that an excellent lady and I will be able to arrange terms satisfactory to both parties." Next evening the girl ushered her aunt into Toad's cell, bearing his week's washing pinned up in a towel. The old lady had been prepared beforehand for the interview, and the sight of certain gold sovereigns that Toad had thoughtfully placed on the table in full view practically completed the matter and left little further to discuss. In return for his cash, Toad received a cotton print gown, an apron, a shawl, and an old black bonnet, the only condition the old lady made being that she should be gagged and bound and dumped down in a corner. By this not very convincing artifice, she explained, aided by picturesque fiction which she could supply herself, she hoped to keep her job in spite of the suspicious appearance of things. Toad was delighted with the suggestion. It would enable him to leave the prison in some style, and with his reputation for being a desperate and dangerous fellow untarnished. And he readily helped the jailer's daughter to make her aunt appear the victim of circumstances over which she had no control. "Now it's your turn, Toad," said the girl. "Take off that coat and waistcoat of yours. You're fat enough as it is." Shaking with laughter, she proceeded to hook and eye him into the cotton print gown, arranged the shawl with a professional fold, and tied the strings of the bonnet under his chin. "Now you're the very image of her," she giggled, "only I'm sure you never looked half so respectable in all your life before. Now goodbye, Toad, and good luck. Go straight down the way you came up, and if anyone says anything to you, as they probably will, Being but men, you can answer back a bit, of course, but remember, you're a widow woman, quite alone in the world." With a quaking heart, but as firm a footstep as he could command, Toad set forth cautiously on what seemed to be the most harebrained and hazardous undertaking. But he was soon agreeably surprised to find how easy everything was made for him. The washerwoman's squat figure in its familiar cotton print seemed a passport for every barred door and grim gateway. Even when he hesitated, uncertain as to the right turning to take, he found himself helped out of his difficulty by the warder at the next gate, anxious to be off to his tea, summon him to come along sharp and not keep him waiting there all night. The mocking and the humorous comments to which he was subjected, and to which, of course, he had to provide prompt and effective reply, formed indeed his chief danger, for Toad was an animal with a strong sense of his own dignity, and the teasing was mostly, he thought, poor and clumsy, and the humor of the jokes entirely lacking. However, he kept his temper, though with great difficulty, suited his retorts to his company and his supposed character, and did his best not to overstep the limits of good taste. It seemed hours before he crossed the last courtyard, rejected the depressing invitations from the last guard-room, and dodged the outspread arms of the last warder, pleading with simulated passion for just one farewell embrace. But at last he heard the wicket gate in the great outer door click behind him, felt the fresh air of the outer world upon his anxious brow, and knew that he was free. Dizzying with the easy success of his daring exploit, he walked quickly towards the lights of the town, not knowing in the least what he should do next, only quite certain of one thing, that he must remove himself as quickly as possible from the neighborhood. There we go. It's a mighty silly-looking toad. As he walked along, considering his attention was caught by some red and green lights a little way off, to one side of the town, and the sound of the puffing and snorting of engines and banging of shunted trucks fell on his ear. "Aha," he thought, "this is a piece of luck. A railway station is the thing I want most in the whole world at this moment, and what's more, I needn't go through the town to get it." He made his way to the station accordingly, consulted a timetable, and found that a train bound more or less in the direction of his home was due to start in half an hour. "More luck," said Toad, his spirits rising rapidly, and went off to the booking office to buy his ticket. He gave the name of the station that he knew to be nearest to the village which Toad Hall was the principal feature, and mechanically put his fingers in search of the necessary money, where his waistcoat pocket should have been. But to his horror he recollected that he had left both coat and waistcoat behind him in his cell, and with them his pocketbook, money, keys, watch, matches, pencil case. Baffled and full of despair, he wandered blindly down the platform where the train was standing, and tears trickled down each side of his nose. It was hard, he thought, to be within sight of safety and almost of home, and to be balked by the want of a few wretched shillings. Very soon his escape would be discovered. The hunt would be up. He would be caught, loaded with chains, dragged back again to the prison, and bread and water and straw. His guards and penalties would be doubled, and oh, what sarcastic remarks the girl would make. What was to be done? He was not swift of foot. His figure was unfortunately recognizable. Could he not squeeze under the seat of a carriage? As he pondered, he found himself opposite the engine, which was being oiled, wiped, and generally caressed by its affectionate driver, a burly man with an oil can in one hand and a lump of cotton waste in the other. "Hello, mother," said the engine driver. "What's the trouble? You don't look particularly cheerful." "Oh, sir," cried Toad, crying afresh, "I am a poor unhappy washerwoman, and I've lost all my money and can't pay for a ticket. And I must get home tonight somehow, and whatever am I to do, I don't know. Oh dear, oh dear." "That's a bad business indeed," said the engine driver reflectively. "Lost your money and can't get home? And got some kids waiting for you, I dare say?" "Any amount of 'em," sobbed Toad, "and they'll be hungry and playing with matches and upsetting lamps, the little innocents, and quarreling and going on generally. Oh dear, oh dear." "Well, I'll tell you what I do," said the good engine driver. "I'll give you a ride on my engine. It's against the company's regulations, but we're not so very particular in these out-of-the-way parts." The Toad's misery turned into rapture as he eagerly scrambled up into the cab of the engine. The guard waved his welcome flag, the engine driver whistled in a cheerful response, and the train moved out of the station. They had covered many and many a mile, and Toad was already considering what he would have for supper as soon as he got home, when he noticed that the engine driver, with a puzzled expression on his face, was leaning over the side of the engine and listening hard. Then he saw him climb onto the coals and gaze out over the top of the train. Then he returned and said to Toad, "It's very strange. We're the last train running in this direction tonight, yet I could be sworn that I heard another following us." Toad became grave and depressed, and a dull pain in the lower part of his spine, communicating itself to his legs, made him want to sit down and try desperately not to think of all the possibilities. By now the moon was shining brightly, and the engine driver, steadying himself on the coal, could command a view of the line behind them for a long distance. Presently he called out, "I can see it clearly now. It is an engine on our rails, coming along at a great pace. It looks as if we're being pursued." The miserable Toad, crouching in the coal dust, tried hard to think of something to do, with dismal want of success. "They are gaining on us fast," cried the engine driver, "and the engine is crowded with the queerest lot of people, men like ancient warders, waving halberds, policemen in their helmets, waving truncheons, and shabbily dressed men in hats, obvious and unmistakable plain-clothes detectives, even at this distance, waving revolvers and walking sticks, all waving and all shouting the same thing, 'Stop! Stop! Stop!'" Then Toad fell on his knees among the coals, and raising his clasped paws in supplication cried, "Save me! Only save me, dear kind Mr. Engine Driver, and I will confess everything. I am not the simple washerwoman I seem to be. I have no children waiting for me, innocent or otherwise. I am a Toad, the well-known and popular Mr. Toad, a landed proprietor. I have just escaped by my great daring and cleverness from a loathsome dungeon into which my enemies had flung me. And if those fellows on that engine recapture me, it will be chains and bread and water and straw and misery once more for poor unhappy innocent Toad." The engine driver looked down upon him very sternly and said, "Now tell the truth. What were you put in prison for?" "It was nothing very much," said poor Toad, coloring deeply. "I only borrowed a motor car while the owners were at lunch. They had no need of it at the time. I didn't mean to steal it, really, but people, especially magistrates, take such harsh views of thoughtlessness and high-spirited actions." Let's have a look at the train here. There we go. Yeah, look there at the moon. The engine driver looked very grave and said, "I fear that you have been indeed a wicked Toad, and by rights I ought to give you up to the offended justice. But you are evidently in sore trouble and distress, so I will not desert you. I don't hold with motor cars for one thing, and I don't hold with being ordered about by policemen when I'm on my own engine for another. And the sight of an animal in tears always makes me feel soft-hearted. So cheer up, Toad, I'll do my best, and we may beat them yet." They piled on more coals, shoveling furiously. The furnace roared, the sparks flew, the engine leapt and swung, but still their pursuers slowly gained. The engine driver, with a sigh, wiped his brow with a handful of cotton waste and said, "I'm afraid it's no good, Toad. You see, they are running light, and they have the better engine. There's just one thing left for us to do, and it's your only chance. So attend very carefully to what I tell you. A short way ahead of us is a long tunnel, and on the other side of that the line passes through a thick wood. Now, I will put on all the speed I can while we are running through the tunnel, but the other fellows will slow down a bit naturally for fear of an accident. When we are through, I will shut off the steam and put on brakes as hard as I can, and the moment it's safe for you to do so, you must jump and hide in the wood before they get through the tunnel and see you. Then I will go full speed ahead again, and they can chase me if they like, for as long as they like and as far as they like. Now, mind and be ready to jump when I tell you." They piled on more coals, and the train shot into the tunnel, and the engine rushed and roared and rattled, till at last they shot out at the other end into the fresh air and the peaceful moonlight, and saw the wood lying dark and helpful on either side of the line. The driver shut off the steam and put on brakes. The Toad got down on the step, and as the train slowed down to almost a walking pace, he heard the driver call out, "Now jump!" Toad jumped, rolled down a short embankment, picked himself up unhurt, scrambled into the wood, and hid. Peeping out, he saw his train get up speed again and disappear at a great pace. Then out of the tunnel burst the pursuing engine, roaring and whistling, her motley crew waving their various weapons and shouting, "Stop! Stop!" When they were past, the Toad had a hearty laugh, for the first time since he was thrown into prison. But he soon stopped laughing when he came to consider that it was now very late and dark and cold, and he was in an unknown wood, with no money and no chance of supper, and still far from friends and home. And the dead silence of everything, after the roar and rattle of the train, was something of a shock. He dared not leave the shelter of the trees, so he struck into the wood, with the idea of leaving the railway as far as possible behind him. At last, cold, hungry, and tired out, he sought the shelter of a hollow tree, where with branches and dead leaves he made himself as comfortable a bed as he could, and slept soundly till the morning.